Hey, it's Chris. 11 games. I'm going to go through all 11 of them, ranking them 11 to 1 of my preference of games that are easy to hit to the table, that are affordable, that are in a small box that you can play to get good play count to affordability, because that's what matters in this hobby. So let's do this. First up here, number 11, we have Gacha. Now, this is based off of Japanese toys that they will pick up traditionally over in Japan, but also you've seen them in terms of like the loot boxes at the stores, right? Like, okay, here's 17 different characters from your favorite show, anime, or video game, and you grab one of the boxes and you don't know which one it's going to be, and then you open it up and it's the one you wanted and awesome, or it's not the one you wanted and you end up buying 4 more to get the one that you want. And so the concept of this game is relatively simple, because what you have are these cards that are going to have icons on them to tell you essentially, okay, on the other side of this card, you either have this, this, or this. And you then draw off one of several different piles that are available to you, put this in your hand, and set collect. And so the concept is relatively simple. Then you have these objective cards that are going to score you victory points. And each of them will tell you you need this many cards to get this many victory points and these little tickets. These little tickets match up. You get these little tokens right here. These little tokens give you bonuses, and rinse and repeat until the end of the game happens and you run out of cards or someone hits the end game scoring conditions by filling out the number of these objectives that they need. So that's the basic concept of the game in a nutshell. It's 2 to 5 players. It plays in about 20 minutes, but the problem is that it's just a little bit too random on the backs of these cards. You've got a lot of different icons and you just never seem to always quite get the one you want. Even when there's 3 versus 2, it's still highly variable. There's little control over what you're getting. It's nice, it's easy, I can play it with my kids, and it's quick. So, I mean, it's not a bad game. It's just not a game that I'm necessarily going to want to play time and time again. So that's why it's number 11. Just to be clear here at the beginning of the video too, none of these are bad games. I didn't dislike any of these games. It's just some of them were slightly better than others. And we're actually going to go to the biggest box of all of these, and this is Ghosts Love Candy 2. This is a different twist on sort of another set collection style of games. It's from 25th Century Games, and what you're doing is you are kids going out for Halloween, and you are drawing tokens from Bagh, trying to obtain candies that are going to be available to you that are going to each score you different amount of victory points here. And the nice thing is the characters are all going after different candies. And the dynamic then that this one gives you is that in each round, you get to essentially bid or put your marker out on kids that are going to give you asymmetric powers. And these kids are going to have certain thresholds in which if you put too much bidding on them, you get the kid. And getting kids is bad because you can see down here that it's actually negative victory points. And then what happens based on what you're putting on these cards is going to influence how much you want to put on there, or if you want to be the last one, first one, or anything else between in the variety of these cards. And that mechanism is relatively clever. Here you can see a little bit of the variable candy scoring, that they're all a little bit different, right? All of them have a different 0, all of them have a different 5. And so what you're going to be doing there is just, it's nice. I like seeing that. And the cast of characters, again, is a lot. There's a lot of these kids that you're drawing through. And most of them, again, are going to be negative. So it's trying to mitigate not getting the kids, but triggering their powers at the same time for your benefit, to also use them to swap the candies that you have that you get that are less worthwhile for the candies that you want that are more worthwhile. Because essentially what you have out here on the board is you have several of these kids out here, and each turn you put out a certain number of these candies on each character. And so when you do that, when you put your bid card on there that look like these, you put the highest one out there. Everyone has the same set of numbered cards. If you're the one that goes highest, yours activates first, and you get whatever candies are on the character. But if you bid so high that it goes over the value, that's when you get the character. Again, very straightforward game. It just sort of went a little bit longer than I wanted it to. It dragged on at the end, even though you have a limited number of cards that you're going. The kids are, again, it's very potentially take that, and very negative take that. And so it's an interesting dynamic. It's an interesting balance. But it ultimately just, it was kind of like, okay, you end up with all these cards, which is both the boon and the curse, right? You have so many of these. I mean, this is just a massive stack, something like I'd probably guess 30 or 40 cards of the kids. And so you'll never have the same game twice. And that's really the biggest benefit of this one as well, as a nice, easy, get to the table, kids level game without, too much overhead. Like this one, for example, play a game of paper, scissors, rock with the player of your choice. The loser must give a candy of their choice to the winner. There's just a lot of that direct interaction. And so if you don't like the direct interaction, that's probably going to be the biggest turnoff for this one at number 10. Number 9, you've never heard of this game. I backed this on Kickstarter crowdfunding for a couple bucks. It's called Bagh Chal, from a Nepalese traditional game. And they took it and they said, okay, we're going to reprint it to keep it alive. And they made this really cool production. It was really cheap. And the production, again, this is the whole game right here. Really cool cloth map, cloth board, whatever you want to call it. It works really well. It's just nice and neat, and it does a great job. You have these sheep that you're going to be putting out on the board here, and you also have a few tigers. And essentially what you do is each turn you lay a sheep, you lay a tiger, you lay a sheep, you lay a tiger. And the tigers are essentially trying to checkers the sheep. And if they can, you get removed. But you're, as the sheep, gently putting them down and then also able to maneuver them around. If you're able to get all your sheep on the board, then it goes until either the tigers capture 4 sheep or the sheep interlock so that none of the tigers can move. Sounds really cool, right? Sounds right up my style in terms of abstracts. The biggest problem with it was not the production, but it's just the game doesn't seem terribly balanced overall. This game seems very, very, at my limited play counts, very, very heavily weighted towards the sheep player. It is an incredibly difficult game as the tiger player, because you'll notice that around the sides here, you can literally just put them on the beginning around the sides here as the sheep player. And if I have a tiger right there, I can't jump. I cannot jump. And so they can just build up around the outside and make those your moves. And so every game gets to the point where all of the sheep are down. It's just then this little pyramid structured game of, if you make a wrong move as a sheep, you give the tiger an ounce of chance of winning, but the tiger never really feels like it's in control. And that just left both me and my wife just feeling a little bit dissatisfied, especially because I love the production and I love the concept and the company that put this game out there on crowdfunding and really did a great, fantastic job of fulfilling it in the first place. So I just was a little let down in the actual gameplay, which again, I wanted a lot more out of this. I thought this was going to be a little bit better. I wish, and again, this is the balancing thing of, if there were 1 or 2 less sheep, does it make it that much dramatically different? Now, obviously, I haven't played the game that much, but thousands of years have said otherwise, and I'm wrong. So take it for what you will. But it left me just feeling a little bit wanting. And that's why it's here at number 9. This is really similar to Ghost Love Candy 2, but it's also significantly different in how it actually plays, even though you, again, have a limited sort of set collection-esque balance that you're trying to achieve by building your longboards of varying colors and numbers. Essentially what you're doing is you're drafting these cards and you're manipulating them between players, and you're trying to build longboards of contiguous colors in higher number order. And so you have to go in order, 5 to 7 to 8. I cannot put a 3 on that. But if I have a 1, a 2, I can put out whatever green one I want next, or I can even put out one of these multicolor boards, which allow me to be more adaptable. Then I can put down my 5, and then I can maybe even put down my 8 there. The longer the contiguous streak, the more points it's going to get you. Again, just like with Ghost Love Candy 2 and Gacha, you've got this variable win condition sets of objectives that you can just mix and match and pick a couple from in order to create an end game scoring. The blue board with the most cards, the yellow board with the most cards, the board with the most wilds in it, the fewest amount of boards. This is one of those games where you play until someone has created enough boards to trigger the end game scoring, not just completed enough objectives. So depending on how long you want to play, how loose you want to play with the high risk, high reward, can I build more boards and extend the game, or should I just cut it off at the knees and try and beat everyone to the punch? Where do things stand? I mean, it's a clever game. it works, but you're definitely going to need a little bit higher player count with this one, because what you can end up doing is you can end up swapping board cards with other players, and that's really where the best part of this game comes from. So this isn't as good at the lower player counts, which is why it's not as high on this list otherwise. But that's Longboard's 25th Century Games. 7 on this list. 7 is Sayu. I did a review of the designer's previous game, Eero, which was a very heavy, sort of almost chess-like colored abstract game. This is no less complex. Let me be very clear. These little arrows on these little tokens, let me show you. What you've got here in front of you now is a configuration of these arrow tiles. And you'll notice that on these arrow tiles, there are 2 different sets of arrows. An arrow in the middle, as well as an arrow on the outside. And so what you're going to be doing on your turn is you take one of your tokens in whatever color you are, and you place it next to other tiles around the outside. But you always have to place it a certain amount away from the center starting tile, so you can't just branch out in one direction. These arrows are going to trigger in the direction that they are pointing. So not only are you playing these offensively every time, but the arrows actually act as defense. So if I put an arrow pointing towards this black arrow, that means this tile doesn't get flipped, but my tile potentially is defending over here and over here, but not over here. So if black put a tile here, all of a sudden my tile then gets flipped, and this triggers every other black arrow that this touches. Sorry, you can't see this one's off camera. But if this one, if for example, if this red one, I would have put it over here in the first place. And this is where the highly, highly difficult memory portion of things goes. Now, here's the tricky part, is you know what these arrows are because they're all the exact same if you flip them over. But that's what you're ending up doing, right? Is you flip it over, but then you have to orient it in the same direction as this one's inner arrow. So it changes spatially which direction those are going, and that's the hard part to try and figure out up here. And so if one person can do that and the other person can't, this is a lopsided game. Now, if you're each equally bad at figuring that out, like me and my wife, this game is actually really competitive. And so then this one flips over, you look and you see, okay, but now it's pointed here and pointed here. Now I didn't get the ability to capture these two, which I could have done. And it's just rinse and repeat until you're out of tiles. And then you count up how many of these tiles are in each color at the end of the game. So here we flip this one over, we orient it this way because that's the way the arrow is. It points down here. These arrows are blocking. This arrow's not blocking now. Oh, orient this one down again. Oh, diagonally. Oh, diagonally blocked though. Oh, there. Okay, there you go. Fantastic concept. It's just the overhead in the mental game, just like Eero, is so immense that it's going to be turning people off, even though the concept is completely unique and it's actually a really freaking hard, amazing game at the same time. But because it's so thinky, if you're going to play it true, huge analysis paralysis potential. So take that for what you will in this really fantastic game, Sayu. Now these top 6, I'm probably going to do individual reviews on some of them in the future on the channel. So if you want to learn more, definitely subscribe if you haven't already at this point. Number 6, we're going to be doing slightly something different here. This is going to be the most divisive one on the list. This is Three Sisters. 25th Century Games. This is probably, I don't know why I say probably, this is the heaviest roll and write I've ever played. And speaking of Sayu and the brain burning, that's what this one is. Not that it's a bad thing, but there's just so much going on with this one. There's a reason that people who are looking for heavier games, people who like heavier games, this is the roll and write for you. Pinchback and Riddle, the designers, like this is their vibe, right? Motor City is their latest one that just is getting received by backers from crowdfunding. This was its predecessor. And I would argue that this one is heavier than Motor City. They let me play a preview print and play version of Motor City like a month or so prior to the campaign. And I understood that one pretty well. This one goes over my head at times. Like, I'm not good at this one at all. It's a fantastic game. I suck at it. And that's probably more of my bias speaking than anything else. Is why it's 6 on this list. Just because it's just probably too heavy for me. I'm not that smart. I'm not that good at games. Like, folks, you know, I love talking about games, and I know what I like, and I like this a lot, but I suck at it. It's more of an effort and frustration at times for me. And so just with all of these different areas that you see growing and producing and watering and trying to keep up with, as well as having this underlying board of where you're going to be maneuvering back and forth between these areas, depending on the round, it's a lot of stuff to do. I know why this game is loved. I mean, this is no question an absolutely fantastic game. I mean, let me be clear about these top 6. This is splitting hairs at the top 6. These are not bad games at all. This is just your mileage may vary, and if I gave you these top 6 games, you would probably put them in, a completely different order than me, and that's completely okay. But this is probably the heaviest roll and write I've ever played, and for me and my wife, especially when I play these with my wife, who is my main gaming partner for the roll and writes, this is too heavy for her and I together. It's too much going on in a good, fantastic, amazing, if you want something like this, go out and buy this game sort of way. So that's why it's number 6. Number 5. Number 5 is going to be something that you've never heard of. It's more recently released. This is Button Shy's latest iteration in the 18 card game situation. This is a campaign game with 18 cards. Does that make sense to anybody else? How do you do that? Like, I always looked at Button Shy and I said, how do you make a game out of 18 cards, right? That can't freaking work. But wait, it does. So the concept of this game, though, is relatively simple. Now, the caveat with this game, and I sort of hate making this caveat, but if we're going to call it an 18 card game, you have to know that this one requires a little bit of an app usage. And so it's going to help you navigate the setup. It's going to help you navigate the system in terms of when you win or lose each scenario, what happens, what of your secret deck of cards here gets added or doesn't get added, and then sort of how you do the next setup, rinse and repeat until you get to the end. The concept is relatively simple. And as you're going across, you have a round by round situation that slowly unlocks bad things as you're going across with these bad guys, depending on which bad guy you're fighting. They have takedown effects as well as they have fighting effects that you're going to have to do. You have treasure cards in terms of things that you're going to be utilizing, one of 4 or potentially 5 different sides of things or items or resources that you're going to be utilizing to acquire better upgrades and more items for your hero card as you're going along, unlocking these at the bottom, as well as utilizing the skill checks that are going to be present on these double-sided cards of loot, maps, bad guys, as well as locations. And so you can see what you're getting here in terms of location cards. If you get the top one, you get the free resource. Spend a resource, spend a resource, spend a resource, or do a skill check. And on the sides, you can see that each of them has different rewards based on what you need. And so that's the concept, right? It's relatively simple. And to be completely honest with you, it kind of blew me away. I didn't realize you could do this much. Like, I never, this is one of those concepts that this is why I'm not a game designer. There are 3 or 4 things at least potentially on each side of these double-sided cards. Like, I would never think to use more than one thing on a double-sided card. And so the fact that they did this and it works and you can play through the full scenario, you can unlock things, you can go up against bad guys, you can upgrade your characters. Just all of this stuff is just, it blows my mind. Is it the most deep? Is it the most immersive? No. Is it the best rule set? No. I mean, that's probably the biggest criticism that I will make with both of the Button Shy games that I own. Spoilers, one is coming up next on the list as well. That the rule books often leave a little bit to be desired. I feel like the games that I have played now, there it leaves a little bit of interpretation because you're trying to fit so much in this small package on this limited amount of content rule space that fits in the Telltale sort of small frame that they go for, that sometimes with the more complex the game is, you could easily miss out on some of the ambiguity that gets left up with this, which brings me to number 4, the next in this, BattleCrest, which again is a two-player skirmish style game with 4 asymmetric characters that is spatially maneuvering through trying to head-to-head attack each other. This should not work as well as it is. It shouldn't. It does have a solo mode? It does. Is the AI very good in the solo mode, though? The AI is not very good in the solo mode. That's probably the weakest element of this game by far. But essentially what you have here is you end up with this grid-based system, and each of these grid cards have different icons on the sides that if you're adjacent to them, you can either take that as an action or it gives you a significant benefit. And then you end up with these characters that are going to be activated with the special cards. You have a certain number of special cards with the special abilities that you're going to be cycling through. And as you utilize them, each game you play is going to be different because you have essentially 5 or 6 of these cards at your disposal, and you can see already that they're double-sided. And after you utilize one round of them or one turn of them, you flip them over. And so the combination of having one side up versus the other, having, say, an ally that moves around on the board versus a different special ability, that's just kind of cool. And you're maneuvering across the board here like this, trying to get around, trying to get adjacent, trying to do ranged attacks to knock out your opponent who only has so much health here, depending on, you know, which character you're playing as. So this one, by far and away, the better of the two for me as a 1 versus 1 lover. And I believe that they're actually having another crowdfunding campaign to put out another expansion for more characters. I think they've been testing on the Discord. So this expansion number 1, which has a solo character and an expansion character, is just great. And I just need a little bit more. I just need a little bit more asymmetry. 1 or 2 other elements get added slightly, you know, making it that much deeper, because the overhead is super straightforward in this one. Absolutely fantastic game. And you'll see why this one is only at number 4, because I cannot say enough good things about this game in the first place as a 1 versus 1 skirmish game for a low price point, which it beats a lot of its competitors that are a lot more heavily priced or plasticized nowadays as well. Number 3. Another small box game here from John Cloudis, and literally Small Box Games is the name of the company. This is An Empty Throne. This is a set collection, almost more of a battle line-esque game if you're familiar with the Knizia classic that. And that's why it's so good, because it takes a variation on that in terms of numbers and asymmetric abilities and slight factions, and just does it in a really compact, unique, but also knowable way. Again, the biggest criticism that with numbers 3 and 4 here that I will give is because it's trying to be so small in overhead, in size, in every shape and sense, that the rules, again, need a little bit of work. The rules leave a little bit too ambiguous of a nature sometimes in terms of some of the nuance and the errata and just the very specific what happens if this or that. But you can see here you've got different numbers of different suits, essentially, that have 2 different options on them, top or bottom. And depending on where you're drawing this card from in one of the various stacks that you will end up with in the game as the setup, because I just threw these cards out here, this is not actually the actual setup of the game, you get to choose which one you're doing or how you're going to be placing them in the areas that are in front of you in the first place, a la battle line, and you're ending up with the most points at the end depending on which sort of set collection X scoring condition you have been able to fulfill. 54 card deck, a little bit of everything. It just works. I don't know what else to say. I mean, these small box games, don't be fooled by the price point. Don't be fooled by the lack of bling or the number of cards. You don't need a lot to have a lot. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson that number 2 and number 1 are heavily going to encapsulate, as well as we get to them next. And so what are number 2 and number 1 as I'm struggling to put this back in the box? Well, number 2, again, I went down to the wire with this one in terms of deciding number 2 versus number 1. So this is more like a 1A and 1B. And once I show you what these games are right here on the table, you'll know why that is. 1 is more of my preferred. The other is just so good that I cannot not talk about it. So I think depending on the day, one of these is 1A and one of these is 1B. So I'll just tell you them both at the same time. You're talking Radlands and you're talking Scout. This is the new version of Scout. I actually had the original version of Scout. I played it wrong. We messed up the rules. It was horribly unfun, and I got rid of it. I got it again because it's amazing. Radlands is Radlands. Roxley has the most amazing, one of, if not the most amazing track record in the recent 2 or 3 years. The fact that they've stayed so consistent across different types and mechanisms and themes is just freaking amazing. If you're not familiar with the concept here, Scout is a relatively straightforward game of 2 to 5 players. You end up with a whole bunch of scoring tokens, and if you're not careful, well, you're going to end up with negative points. But the concept of Scout is relatively simple. You end up with a handful of cards that have 2 numbers, and what you do with your hand is you either orient it this way, or you orient it this way so that all of the numbers are together. But what you're doing is you're taking out sets of cards that are either going to be a combination of numbers or runs that are going to beat somebody else's combination of runs or colors that's in the middle of the table already. If you can do that, you take their cards and score them for points. If you can't, then you have to scout and steal one of their cards. So for example, if the pair that's out here is a set of 4s, I have to have either a pair of higher 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, or I have to have a run of more cards. Sounds simple and straightforward, right? Well, not when your hand looks like this. 1, 5, 1, 7, 6, 7, 2. Now, if I can't beat it, for example, I can then take one of these 4s, and maybe I want this 4 because this one's an 8 here. I take it, I can turn it either way that I want and place it anywhere in my hand. So now, when my turn comes around again, I have a 6, a 7, and an 8 run that I can potentially play. But because I took a card from here, the person whose cards those were gets a point. Cards in your hand at the end of the round when somebody goes out completely, that is how many negative points you have. Or if somebody doesn't go out completely but nobody can play and it goes all the way around, that ends the round as well. So that's why you'll see my token sitting here with negatives. -10. That's right, -10. You will end up in the negatives at some point when you play this game, but it just freaking works. This is a game where you go, how did I not think of this? It's so amazing. It reminds me very much of like The Mind or The Game, if you're familiar with those. Like, how did I not think of this? Because it's so simple, so elegant, so amazing. And for 20 bucks, you can play this a whole game night and be completely freaking satisfied. The biggest problem with this game is the box is about, like an inch too small. You need another inch this way because of the lid raise due to all those freestanding tokens that I just had out on the board. So that's it. The other one, Radlands. This is one of the top 5 1-versus-1 card skirmish games out there, period. And depending on the person, depending on the time, depending on the day, there will be a good argument by people made that this is one of, if not the best one out there. This takes the concept of Epic, the card game that came out years ago, where everything is vastly overpowered, and just gives you a handful of stuff and turns it into lanes where you're trying to knock out the other person's water tower. Did he say water tower? Yeah, I said water tower, water tower. And water is the currency in which you're going to be playing all of your various cards. Now, you have cards that are going to be at your disposal, but you also have all of these, which are your essential locations that you get to start at that are going to give you asymmetric powers in each of the 3 different lanes that you have at the start of the game. And that's also where the dynamic is just completely different. Now, depending on what version you have here, I have the little magnetic version. It's going to be, your mileage may vary on the deluxeified component style of things, but that doesn't matter because the gameplay is the same across the board. And the gameplay is just amazing. I mean, look at this massive deck of cards that are all different, that are going to give you such dynamic gameplay, and just everything is overpowered. Everything seems way too powerful that it's going to, win you the game, or, oh my gosh, I can't believe the opponent got this card. I'm screwed. And then you play something equal the next turn. But it's also so finely balanced that even if you get SOL one way or the other, you don't go, oh, geez, I just wasted. No, I mean, you play again because you can play this game like 3 times in an hour. And the combination of those 2 things right there, the fun, the time, the balance, and just the, haha, I played something awesome. Because is there anything better than playing something freaking amazing in a game? A combo, a scoring condition, a winning trump move? There's nothing better than that. And that's why this game is so amazing, because it does it all the time when you play it on a turn-by-turn basis, and that cannot be understated. So there you go. That's why those 2 games are 1A and 1B, depending on the day, depending on the time, depending on, how I feel at the time of me filming this. So there you go. 11 games, quick, short synopsis, brief overviews, pluses and minuses, all in one. There you go. Let me know what you think. You want to see more of this in the future? Let me know. Subscribe, and, we're going places. I'm small, and I love talking about board games. Yes! Stay classy. See you around. Have a great, freaking, fantastic day. Thanks for watching. Quick, short synopsis, briefest